Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
The market is constantly changing. New companies are being launched, seasoned businesses are emerging, while others are closing their door because they are no longer relevant. As we start to focus on the new year, now may be a good time to revisit our value proposition and how to present it to others. Stay tuned as Bill and I discuss Renegotiate or Reframe, trading with price, and other fascinating topics on episode 537 of the Winning and Selling podcast.
So you're thinking about the new year already?
I am. I think as people start listening to this, it's November, it's December, they're kind of reflecting on 2023. The election's over with now, and we can get on with our lives.
I don't know. I think if I'm thinking about next year already, I've got a sixth of my year that I'm leaving behind.
Well, it's not necessarily leaving it behind. I like to use the example of a salesperson that's in the third week of the month, and they're at 55% of their goal. Third week. They just finished their third week. They're at 55% of your goal. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to cram for a harvest. You can't cram for a harvest on the fourth week. The point is that we need to be able to start the month differently and act differently so that by the end of the third week, we're at 80% of our goal, not 55% of our goal. So looking at the next year right now is the time to start thinking about what you're going to do different.
Well, I think also it's time to start making those phone calls, because the phone calls you make in November and December start to come to fruition in January and February. And if you take the month of December off, which I think many people mentally do, you're going to have a really slow January because you're not going to have enough things going. So we're going to talk about how we think and about accountability and all these different topics as we start on our new book, Scott, that you've recommended, The Theory of Accountability. We're in part 1, chapters 1 and 2, and this is by Sam Silverstein, and Sam was a guest on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. We're going to talk about chapter 1, which is the way we think. And part 1, chapters 1 and 2, I say this whenever I start a new book, this is the setup, right? Yeah. So we're going to define the problem and kind of give us some setup of what's to come in the book. And so chapter 1 is really defining the problem. He calls it the way we think. And what he really wants to talk about here is that the traditional concepts of accountability, i.e. holding other people accountable to the tasks they were meant to do, can cause people to feel manipulated or pushed into a new behavior. And what he's saying is we really need to create an environment that inspires people and prioritizes accountability, not one where I hold you accountable for the goals I set for you. So what's your thoughts on this, Scott?
I think he puts accountability on both sides. The person that is the leader of the company has got to create an environment where, like you said earlier, it inspires people. And I think he brings up a really good point about the difference between accountability and responsibility. We are responsible for things, but we're accountable to people. And accountability starts with the leader first. And the leader of the organization has to be accountable to the people that they lead. And too often leaders of companies think that, in this instance, the salespeople need to be accountable. The salespeople need to be accountable. But what about you as the leader being accountable too?
Well, I think a lot of times leaders are accountable to other people. What I find, and my issue with this conversation in some ways, is that leader is maybe he's responsible or she's responsible to the board. And that responsibility isn't always seen by the sales team, or that sales manager is responsible to the VP of sales, and they're being held accountable for those numbers as well. So I think it's a little bit of a canard to say, you're not responsible for anything. You're pushing it all down to us. Well, we're all responsible to somebody, unless we own the business. And then I'm responsible to my wife, which is, kind of worse than the board. But, I do agree that we want to create an environment, that leader needs to create an environment where people want to set goals, want to have accountability to what their responsibilities are. And then when we hit those goals, everyone is rewarded.
Right. And I love this line out of the book: a transition that creates an organizational culture that actually inspires accountability in team members. That's what you talked about earlier, is being accountable. And the accountability is part of the experience, I think, that people want to have with each other within an organization. And sometimes that accountability ends up like manipulating people and controlling people. And one line in the book says that creativity does not come from control. Creativity comes from an environment where everybody's working together to achieve the same goal, and making accountability part of the culture and increasing the standards for everybody within the organization.
I think we need to look at, as you mentioned, as a leader or as an individual who's not a leader, we need to be accountable to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we spend so much time waiting for other people to hold us accountable. I can't really get work done until someone's watching over my shoulder. And the sign of true growth is I am accountable to me. I'm accountable to the commitments I made, because that's who I am. I am a person of my word, and I said I would do these things. And therefore, whether it's accountability to the number of phone calls I'm going to make or the number of appointments I'm going to have, I'm accountable to that. Maybe I'm only accountable to my end goals. But whatever those things are, that's my responsibility to be accountable, not to wait for someone to hold me accountable. That's, in my mind, that's a sign of immaturity.
I always say, working with salespeople is act like somebody's always watching, and you're going to be able to maintain a high level of integrity if you act like somebody's watching. If you're training somebody in, how are you going to act? You're going to do everything right. You're going to be thorough. You're going to be communicative. You're going to be sharing everything that they need to know. You're going to be pointing out things that you wouldn't necessarily share with other people, but because you're doing a tutorial, you're sharing everything with them. Right. So that's the integrity and higher standards.
Yeah, and I think those higher standards, sometimes they're thrust upon us. And this is when goal setting and accountability always is challenging. I know I'm working with organizations right now, and you are too, that are setting goals for next year. Mm-hmm. And the organization sets maybe a $30 million growth goal. Well, the sales managers then get that goal, and maybe it's split up, and each territory has to do 10 million. And then each salesperson has to do $2 million in new sales for the year. Okay, well, that's split it up. But if I don't believe I can do that 2 million, mm-hmm. then now I'm going to be frustrated all the time, because I had this goal thrust upon me. I have this accountability that's going to be held. I'm going to be held to, and I really come out of the gates thinking, well, I did 1.5 million last year. What's different this year? How am I going to do 2 million? I really don't know what I'm going to do. I felt like I worked hard all year, and now I've got a goal that's 30% higher than it was last year.
Right. And you automatically resign to the goal before you even start the year.
Right.
Like, I'm never going to make it. What'll happen, what'll happen. What'll be, it will be, you know? Okay.
Yep. And you pretend better with your boss. Yeah. I'm charging the hill here with you. Yeah. And then every time they come back, you can say, well, hey, Scott, you gave me this goal, and it's not something that we can really do here. So it'll be interesting. I really want to, because he does want to rejigger the way that we think about setting goals and accountability. And so now we're going to kind of launch into his theory of accountability. That's in chapter 2. And he starts to called the theory of accountability. He starts to ask questions like, how accountable am I? Mm-hmm. Right. So quit asking how accountable are your people. Think about yourself first. How accountable am I? And not just to tactical commitments, the numbers, but what are the relational commitments? Mm-hmm. How can we go beyond thinking about, okay, Scott, you've got a $2 million goal, and you need to do 30 calls a day and have 10 appointments a week. And we're going to start looking at those goals, and you need to do, one proposal every week out of those 10 appointments. And now that's your goal, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And there's no relationship there. It's all tactical.
Yeah. So true. Happens a lot. And, the sales managers can check the box going, I did my job. I told them what they need to do. It's a little bit more than that. I mean,
that's right. And now I got something to yell at them about when they only do 25 calls a day and have 8 appointments.
Yeah. People love coming to sales meetings with that kind of attitude and environment. Not.
That's right. So, again, he's going to talk about relationships a lot in this book, and how do we develop trust between each other, trust between the sales manager. My job as a sales leader is not only to hold you accountable to your goals, but to help you hit them. What tools can I give you? What can I help provide you with in order to help you hit those goals? So that's kind of the trust in my mind that has to be there. It's not just, go get them, Tiger.
Right. Yeah. Charge. Yeah. No, that's not it. And sometimes attitude is important, but there's just too much emphasis on attitude and we don't commit to the behavior. If we have a
Right.
bad attitude, we need to commit to the behavior. It'll change our attitude. That's normal. It's very normal.
Well, here, let's get into the equation in the theory of accountability. He's going to play off E equals MC squared. He's going to get into that in the next chapter, but I know that's coming up. And so the E, M, and C in E equals MC squared, E is experience. And that's going to be a big part of what he's talking about, because what in my mind, that's the dream. What is it that what are we going to get out of all this work we do? Right? It's not, I'm going to hit a $2 million goal. Is it, I'm going to be able to buy a boat? Is it my kid's going to be able to go to college or private school? Is it, what is it, my goal? What is the experience we're going to create? What's the draw that's going to make me do something different to hold myself accountable to? And I think that's a real big part of what he's going to talk about.
Yeah, it is. It is.
The M is mindset. What's our belief system? And Scott, you talk about belief system a lot, but is our belief system correct? So when I don't believe I'm going to hit that $2 million goal, it's already challenging my belief system, and my belief system is going to win unless you can change my mindset and my belief system and help me break through some of those things that are holding me back.
Right. I think beliefs trump strategy every single day. And if we don't have supportive beliefs, no matter what strategy we have, it's not going to be effective. So we really need to look at our mindset.
And then the C is commitment. And he talks about commitment squared. He's going to talk about that. And that's the persistent, relentless action we undertake to support the experience, our beliefs, and our relationships. So that commitment to the goal, the commitment to the behaviors, the commitment to the tactical pieces that we have to do. So then they back up and we hit those goals that we have, which is the experience, because we've gotten our mind right and we've done the right things. We've performed the right behaviors.
Yeah. And commitment is so powerful. It's chapter 1 in my book. And it really demonstrates your reputation that you want to have in the marketplace, reputation internally within the company and also externally with prospects, customers, and clients. And when you follow through on your promises, you're delivering value. And when you're delivering value, then people are willing to give you money when you deliver value. If we're not delivering value through our services that we offer and keeping our promises that we're putting out there, then people aren't going to pay us and we won't generate any money. I mean, most of us sell services. And even if you sell a product, you're also selling a service that goes along with it.
Well, you're selling trust. That ability to say that this person is going to be with me. I know they're going to make money. That's okay. I just want to make sure that they're going to cover me when times are tough. When supply chain is weak, am I going to get enough products to keep me going, or are they going to leave me high and dry? And so we're building a level of trust with our customers, with our clients, and they're relying on us, right? For you and I, we may have a training program, but they're not just relying on that training program being conducted, but being effective.
Right.
And the time we spend with them to be thoughtful ideas and bringing in new concepts to them. So that's the trust that we're building, and the commitment then builds that trust. So the next thing we're going to talk about in this book, part 2, chapters 3, 4, and 5. And we're going to start getting into that experience. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a fast read, and it's very applicable no matter what our role is. If you're a listener of the podcast, I think it would be a great book for you to check out.
And if you haven't picked up The Theory of Accountability by Sam Silverstein, we would recommend you do that and follow along with us.
So our topic today is renegotiate or reframe, trading on price. And this kind of is looking at the products and services that we offer and how can we work with the supplier and renegotiate some of our terms, and how can we reframe some of our offerings when we work with prospects so that prospects can see our service, our value differently but still valuable. I think about going to the convenience store and picking up a Snickers bar, and for some reason, the Snickers bar keeps getting smaller and the price keeps going up. Still buy it. And I'm thinking, how does this work? Well, they're reducing the size of it, and so they're making it smaller. So they're changing the manufacturing of it and reframing it in a way where I still want to pay more because it's still valuable to me. So I still buy the Snickers bar, even though it's getting smaller. I think about
Well, your
Costco.
problem is going to the convenience store because you're paying the most for
Yeah.
that Snicker bar than you could.
That's my
Buy
next
the
part.
20 pack at Target, you know.
That's what I'm getting to. Costco versus Sam's Club.
There you go.
Costco has a philosophy of how can we add more value to this particular product or this offering that's not available anyplace else so that the customers, the members, end up willing to buy it and they're going to get a better value. I look at the protein bag at Costco. I think it's 6.5 pounds and it's $49. And then I go to Target and I see a 5.5 pound bag for $48. And I'm like, well, that's a little cheaper. No, it's actually less quantity too. So they package it differently so that they're able to deliver the best value. Look at some cell phone companies. I remember when Nextel was offering free incoming calls. People would get Nextel phones because free incoming calls, they didn't have to pay for minutes. And then all of a sudden, that wasn't really a value anymore. Other companies were offering packages, unlimited calls, unlimited minutes. They repackaged it. They renegotiated the services that they were able to offer to their customers, and the customers reframe the price as to how much is this worth. And then think about a panic attack when you can't find your phone. I mean, look at how valuable the phone is that we have and we need. When we can't find it, we have a panic attack. So we're looking at how can we look at our company, our services, our products, and renegotiate with our supplier on how can we get a better price or better terms. We can never separate the two. It's always price and terms. And then how can we reframe the offering to our customers? I got a call yesterday from Comcast, and they left a message that there's new packages coming out and there's greater discounts available. Oh, really? So I've been paying too much. They're renegotiating their supply. Maybe the equipment's being paid off, so now they don't need to generate as much revenue to cover the equipment. And then they're reframing the offering to the customer so the customers get different packages and they pay different fees for that. So I encourage you to call Comcast and get a better deal.
Well, I want to break in here for a second, Scott. I know you're on a rant, and so that's
building
good.
a foundation.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of things that come to mind for me. First of all, a couple of your examples were such that, of course, I can buy it cheaper if there's more in the package and it's the same price.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of times our salespeople don't have that opportunity. They're more trying to sell the Snicker bar, which
Right.
we're going to give you the same thing, but we got to increase the cost of it. And that's the hard conversation really to have, is to renegotiate when you have to up the price, but you're not going to really give the customer anything more for that. So I want to see if we can make that part of the discussion. And then also, if we want to rant on Comcast, I was paying up over $100 for Comcast, and then I quit them, and now I got an offer from them for $25.
Amazing.
And so how does that make me feel? It's kind of like the cartoon guy with the big sucker over it, where his head turns into a sucker. I've been paying over $100 for something that you're now going to offer me for $25. So I'm curious, in your conversation, is that renegotiating, reframing, or just begging to get a customer back that you've been screwing for the last 3 or 4 years?
It's reframing it to introduce the law of contrast. So when we think about how much we're paying, we're comparing it from one thing to another. So the law of comparison and the law of contrast comes into effect. I think about restaurants. In Minneapolis, there's a lot of restaurants that are closing, but there's a lot of restaurants that are opening too. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And the restaurants that are closing is because the customers that went there looked at the prices increasing. And I used to pay this, now I pay this. Well, they're comparing the past and the present. So then they go, I'm going to stop coming here. So then they don't visit that restaurant and they go out of business. The last 2 years on restaurants has been very difficult. But a new restaurant opens up with new menus, new offerings, new prices. And a person has no comparison as to what they used to pay for that versus what they pay now. So it's a lot easier for them to accept it because there's nothing to compare it to. They just go ahead and buy it.
Right,
But
right.
when we're shopping for products online, look at, I mean, Amazon throws on 46 different items that you can buy that are very similar, and they all range from twice as much to half as much from what you're looking at. The law of contrast kicks in. So what are we comparing it to? Your situation with Comcast, you're comparing the old price with the new price, and the law of contrast comes into effect. So when we're reframing it, we need to be able to widen the scope a little bit and compare what are some of the other options that prospects have. And when we don't introduce some of the other options that prospects have, then we're becoming a little bit biased instead of being that resourceful advisor. And a term that's coming out over the last year is called sense making. Salespeople need to be sense makers when they work with prospects on what is the best value for the prospect. Get on the same side of the table with the prospect and work together against a problem on the other side of the table.
I think when we renegotiate, you talked about terms and such things. I think we have to look at the whole picture. And as we are working with a client, we should be continually trying to find out what's valuable to them, what's important to them, what makes sense to them. And as we mature with our relationship with the customer, we should be willing to say, you know what, you don't really need this feature, or you don't really need this value. You're never using it. It sounded like a good value. Let's pull that out of the equation here, so that if we can, let's pull that out of the equation so you're not paying for something that you're not using. And let's put that money over here into maybe better terms or better delivery, where you're using that, and that's a much more important value to you. Quit trying to continue to get the same contract with a customer that you should have grown up with, and you lead the renegotiation. Don't wait for them. It's like an objection in the sales process. If you wait for them to bring it up, it feels like they got you. But if you bring it up and you say, hey, I know this is going on, this may be something that's going on in the back of your mind, then we can frame it more effectively ourselves. They bring it up. Now we're back on our heels. Same with renegotiating a contract. If you go in there and say, let's sit down and talk about how we can make this relationship better and more valuable, and maybe even save you a little bit of money, we're going to take the competitors out of the picture.
And think about just asking yourself as a salesperson some questions about, what do customers buy? Like Bill mentioned, I mean, I buy insurance through a company that breaks it down and includes stuff that I need and that is required by law, and some stuff that I don't need, I don't have to pay for because I don't use it. I don't want it. How do customers buy? If we make it easier for customers to buy from us, then it's going to be more valuable because it's easier for the customers to buy from us. What else do they want that we can include? Add value versus cutting the price. And this is where a lot of salespeople end up cutting the price instead of adding more value. What other items can you include that have a very low cost, but a very high value when you put together a package? And then, like Bill said, what are they not using? So if they're not using something, see if there's a way to remove it and make it more about what they want, a la carte packages sometimes. And I know you can't always do that. And, when it comes to negotiating, sometimes the last thing that you want to do is really get into an itemized quote on something, because it's easy for the prospect to then take the quote apart and then piecemeal it based on other companies, instead of offering the full value of your advice and your counsel, you as a salesperson representing a project to a prospect. So
yeah, I would avoid getting into that menu of options where they're paying for options separately. I never let myself get into that in a negotiation. But again, if the customer comes to you and starts that renegotiation, then you're back on your heels. But if you can start it and you can say, hey, Scott, let's sit down and talk about, we got the contracts coming up in about a year. We know our competitor is going to get there in about 6 months and start to hit them. So when we're maybe 8-9 months out, we say, listen, we know this contract's coming up. Let's go sit down and take a look at the things that worked, the things that didn't work, the things you used, the things you didn't use, and let's really narrow this thing down to the best contract we can offer you and the best price we can offer you so that you stay with us because we know who you are. And this sometimes is the concern with organizations where the salespeople turn everything over to someone else.
Right.
And they're never back with the customer again. Oh, I haven't seen you for 2 years. Yeah, but the contract's coming up, so here I am, back on your doorstep again. It's like my taking the dog to the vet story. If the only time they see you is when you're going to ask them for something, your customer is going to become a little gun shy. The only time I ever took my dog in the car was when they went to the vet. It didn't want to go in the car anymore,
Right.
So visit your customers regularly. That customer is still bringing in revenue to the organization. Your job is to continue to build those relationships. And as that 3-year contract is expiring, chances are there's 50% different people that are going to be in the woods bringing in their own suppliers. So you need to make sure you're in there with those customers on a regular basis so they know who you are, you know the changes that are being made, and you know the problems that are going on with the contract.
Yeah. And on the piecemeal, I think about some airlines. They charge very low fees, but then they charge for baggage, and then they charge for seat, and then they charge for a paper ticket. And it's like, really, all of these additional charges, by the time you add up all the additional charges, it equals the same price as a major airline.
Mm-hmm.
But customers do that to themselves. They buy on price and then they complain about the service that they get. It's like, wait a minute, that's the way you
Well,
want
and
it.
that's going to happen in your big contracts too, right?
Yeah,
We find that all the time is that someone will they'll drop the contract with us because they get a better price from somebody, and then they find out that in the long run it costs them a lot more because all of the different things they lied about or obfuscated that they were going to have to add on to that to get up to the same service levels that we were giving you. So sometimes we need to make sure that customers understand the value. And that's a question I have for you, Scott. If we're working with a customer, it's easy for them to lose sight of the value that we're giving them. You talked about the comparisons that we make, right? So somebody else is going to come in and say, hey, look how wonderful we are and we're cheaper. So how can we help a customer understand that they're getting this value proposition from us on a regular basis so they give us the value credit, as it were?
Mm-hmm. I think taking a couple steps back and widening the scope with the prospect and really exploring different options that are available to them is going to make them feel like they're in control of making the decision. And you can start from, what would happen if you didn't even hire us or didn't hire anybody like us? What would you experience? What kind of costs, consequences, and risk would you take on? Now, suppose that you don't want to take on that risk and you want to look at options to reduce that risk. What are some of the options that are available? And when you start walking through the process of what is the prospect experience in the absence of the value your solution provides, now they're able to understand what it's like not to have it in the cost, consequences, and risk compared to the price that they pay when they do get it. And now that's where value is defined. Value is defined by cost minus price equals value. But too often, salespeople get focused on solutions, but they don't think about the solution sticking to a problem. And if the prospect doesn't understand or admit that there's a problem, then there is no value. So you're going to be struggling on selling on price because there's no value to the solution.
Well, I think too, some salespeople don't even know what their value pillars are.
Right. So true.
They haven't categorized and said, okay, here's the 5 values we bring to the marketplace. And here's the solutions they give to customers. Here's the value they bring to customers, not to us. Here's what they give customers. And I think on a pretty regular basis, you need to continue to go back to those customers and say, one of the things that the values we provide is X. How is that working for you? Is that important to you still? Is that still providing you what you need? Maybe it's a certification, or maybe it's a process that we have. Maybe it's just-in-time delivery. Hey, Larry, we've been doing just-in-time delivery. We're keeping your warehouse from being full all the time. Sometimes we found that causes a little nick in your inventory and you're not able to do things. Do we want to make some changes to that just-in-time inventory? So maybe we're getting it a day or two earlier than we're doing right now. And give them that option. I like what you said. Customers want to feel in control. Give them that chance to be in control by asking them questions and allowing them to design that contract. And then when you're starting to move into that contract phase, call it their contract, not your contract. You change, you reframe how you say things. But if you want to build this partnership, you have to risk going in and talking to them and saying, let's make this better.
I did some work for a company that offers supplies to medical labs across the country. And during the supply chain issue, there were some labs that could not run certain tests because they didn't have the supplies. Well, the company that I worked for created a preferential treatment to companies that would make a commitment to the company, the supplier, saying, we're going to buy from you and we need you to be able to give us preferential treatment. So when you do get the stuff in stock, you sell it to us first. And that was very influential. The loyalty that went up with some of their customers was high. And I did some work for another company that offered storm repair services, and they targeted insurance agents. And insurance agents were able to have that loyalty to this storm repair company so that when a tornado went through, everybody needed help. But the ones that were with that insurance company ended up getting preferential treatment because of the relationship that they had with the storm repair company. So you can build relationships and exclusivity and priority service through your relationships with your suppliers and your vendors and your connections and your network. And salespeople can build great networks with great people that can respond quickly to things, and customers love that. And that's really selling value.
All right, super. I think that's a great discussion of reframing or renegotiating.
So think about what the experience would be like from your customer's perspective. Empathy is a strength that salespeople have when they're able to look at a situation from a customer's perspective, and think about some of the renegotiating and the reframing that you need to have for customers, your clients, to be able to see the value that you offer.
All right. Well, super. So we've had a good discussion today. Our golden nugget as we close up is one that should be fairly familiar to most people in business, but I like this one. I didn't know it was from Theodore Roosevelt, though. So, and that is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I really thought of that in terms of the theory of accountability. But I think it also ties into a discussion between salespeople and their clients. Do you really care about your client's success, or are you just trying to make some money off of them? So Theodore Roosevelt, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, great quote. Everything we talked about is at the website winningatselling.com. This is episode 537. And please share this with your colleagues. Post it on your social media networks. We want to be able to build our listenership and share content that's relevant in today's marketplace. And that's the goal that Bill and I have.
Next week, our book club, again, The Theory of Accountability, section 2, part 2, chapters 3, 4, and 5. And our topic is first impressions. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.